This is the complete story of From, the town in the middle of nowhere that traps everyone who drives into it, told from the very beginning through the end of Season 4. What follows is the entire timeline of the show, laid out in order, from the oldest clues buried in the town's history to the newest theories about how it all ends. Lock your doors, turn the lights off, and get comfortable. From opens with the Matthews family driving their RV down a quiet forest road, bickering the way tired families do, until a tree lies fallen across their path and forces them to turn the vehicle around, and the road quietly loops them into a small town none of them have ever heard of. The place looks ordinary. Jim and Tabitha, along with their teenage daughter Julie and their young son Ethan, run headfirst into the single rule that governs this place, which is that every road out curves back on itself, and no one has ever driven free. The people already living here greet the newcomers with the tired calm of prisoners who gave up rattling the bars a long time ago, and that quiet dread tells you more than any speech could. Night is when the town shows its real face. Once the sun drops, creatures that look exactly like smiling people stroll out of the tree line and beg to be let indoors, because they cannot step through a door unless a human willingly invites them in. The only thing holding them back hangs above every entrance in the form of small carved talismans, strange little charms that seal a home as long as they stay unbroken. Boyd Stevens, the weary sheriff who keeps this fragile order alive, runs the nightly lockdown and carries the weight of choices no lawman should ever face. What sets these monsters apart is not raw speed or muscle, it is their patience, their mimicry, and their gift for sounding human enough that a frightened person lowers their guard for one fatal second. Compassion is the trap. What makes the town so suffocating is that staying alive often means ignoring every human instinct to help, and the people who last longest are the ones who learn to go cold. Ethan copes with the terror by treating the whole ordeal as one of his fantasy adventures, mapping the town like a quest full of monsters and riddles, and that childlike imagination ends up mattering far more than the adults realize. A pale, silent boy dressed all in white begins appearing only to Ethan, steering him toward clues the grown-ups keep walking straight past. Living among the survivors is Victor, a gentle and deeply damaged man who arrived here as a child decades ago and never aged out of the fear. Victor speaks in fragments and hands people crayon drawings instead of answers, and the survivors slowly grasp that the town's oldest secrets sit buried somewhere inside his broken memory. No one else remembers that far back. He is the closest thing this place has to a history book, if only someone could learn to read him. The town is far more than a haunted stage. It is a full community of people the show takes real time to make you care about. Kenny, a kind young deputy, stands beside Boyd through the worst nights and steadily loses pieces of the life he once knew. Christy runs the clinic with steady hands. Father Kotri offers what comfort faith can manage in a place that feels abandoned by any god, and the diner kept by the Liu family becomes the warm heart everyone gathers around. Every friendly face raises the stakes. The longer you sit with these people, the more each nightly death lands like the loss of someone you genuinely knew. Beyond the main square sits Colony House, a rival community run by a level-headed woman named Donna, who decided long ago to build a life worth living instead of chasing an exit that might not exist. Newcomers have to choose between the two settlements, and that decision hardens into a low, constant friction running through the whole series. The fragile calm shatters at a Colony House party when a young man named Kevin is tricked by a creature wearing the face of a sweet girl and opens a window to let her inside. One open window is all it takes. The massacre that follows is the first the audience sees in full, a night of slaughter that erases any comfort anyone had left, while a haunted resident named Sarah, obeying voices only she can hear, commits killings of her own that quietly rot the town's trust from within. Jim, an engineer to his core, clings to logic and throws himself into building a radio tower, certain that reaching the outside world will point the way home. A voice does answer through the noise, yet instead of rescue it hands him a warning that freezes his blood, telling him plainly that Tabitha should not be digging that hole. The words stick with him. Tabitha herself has been pulled toward the crumbling stone tower at the edge of town, and toward a maze of tunnels running beneath the streets, drawn by dreams she cannot explain to anyone. Her digging exposes passages that have no business existing, and the first season ends with the earth itself turning on the family as their home caves in over the very tunnel she opened. Season 1 lays down every rule without offering a single reason behind them, and that withholding is exactly what pulled viewers into the next chapter. Season 2 throws the doors open when a bus packed with new arrivals barrels into town, forcing a wave of strangers and fresh conflict onto an already exhausted population. Among them are restless personalities like Randall and a quiet man named Elgin, whose presence steadily complicates the delicate balance Boyd fights to hold. Boyd himself, who vanished into the forest at the close of Season 1, spends much of this run trapped underground beside a shackled, cryptic prisoner named Martin, and the encounter leaves him crawling with parasitic worms tied somehow to the creatures. That infection becomes a weapon. In a savage, unforgettable moment, Boyd kills one of the smiling monsters for the first time in the town's memory by driving the worms out of his own body and into the creature, proving the things in the dark can be made to die after all. The tunnels beneath the town keep expanding into something closer to a buried labyrinth, and every survivor who ventures down returns carrying more questions than answers. Boyd and Kenny try to hold a fragile order above ground while the mystery keeps pulling people below it. The map only grows. Season 2 spends its energy widening the world rather than solving it, planting seeds that would not bloom until much later. Underneath the monster attacks, Season 2 lets its people crack in quieter, more human ways. Sarah, drowning in guilt over the lives she took while following those voices, spends the season clawing after some scrap of redemption, and her struggle keeps the town's wounds raw and open. Boyd carries his own guilt over choices made in the dark, and the strain of leading people who keep dying wears him down to the bone. The cost is visible on his face. Victor drifts through all of it like a ghost from an earlier chapter, dropping hints about a childhood spent here that no one has managed to piece together yet. Christy, the town's doctor, opens one of the dead creatures on her table and finds something that rewrites every assumption the survivors held, because tucked inside the monster sit shriveled, ancient human organs. These things were people once. A separate horror creeps in this season through a nightmare that murders its victims while they sleep, announced each time by the eerie drone of cicadas and bound to an antique music box. This dream creature drags several residents into a coma-like paralysis and claims the life of a woman named Paula before Boyd smashes the box and breaks whatever spell it cast. Every new discovery stacks more evidence that the town runs on machinery far older and stranger than anyone first believed. Two softer developments in Season 2 end up carrying enormous weight down the line. Fatima learns that she is pregnant, a condition that should not be possible here and one that rattles everyone who hears the news. Jade, the sardonic newcomer who rolled into town the same day as the Matthews family, grows obsessed with a strange three-lined symbol surfacing everywhere he looks, and he works out that its shape traces the pattern of tree roots twisting beneath the ground. Neither thread looks earth-shattering at first glance. Both will detonate later, once the show finally explains what those roots are wrapped around and why a child is growing where no child ever should. The biggest shock of the season waits until the final minutes. Tabitha, chasing the pull she has felt since the day she arrived, climbs the tall stone tower and reaches a high window where the silent boy in white stands waiting for her. He pushes her out. What nobody expected was that instead of dying on the rocks below, Tabitha would wake in a hospital bed in Maine, alive and hundreds of miles away, becoming the first person the show ever confirms leaving the town in one piece. That single image reframes everything. Season 3 turns the cruelty up sharply. The creatures stop killing quickly and start performing, staging slow, theatrical acts of torment built to shatter the survivors' minds rather than only their bodies. The most harrowing of these sees the beloved diner owner Tien Chen dragged into a barn and murdered while Boyd is pinned in place and forced to watch every unbearable second. Grief hardens the town. What had felt like a survival problem curdles into something personal and malicious, as if the place had grown tired of being feared and decided it would rather be hated. Randall, who started as one of the most abrasive arrivals, slowly grows into someone the others can lean on, and his shift shows how the town reshapes people over time. Losses pile up faster in Season 3, and the survivors begin to fracture along old grudges and fresh grief. Christy and her partner Marielle try to hold a little happiness together in a place designed to crush it. Tenderness survives anyway. The season keeps insisting that even inside a nightmare, people go on loving, arguing, and hoping, which is exactly what makes each new death cut so deep. Tabitha's time in the outside world lets the story chase a thread no one saw coming, as she hunts down pieces of Victor's past and crosses paths with an elderly man named Henry, who turns out to be Victor's own father. Every answer she uncovers seems to drag her back toward the town rather than carry her away from it. Julie, meanwhile, reveals an ability none of the others possess, a way of slipping through the town's timeline that the show names story walking, letting her reach moments she has no natural business touching. Her gift knots the story into itself in ways that only pay off later. The season is quietly rebuilding the whole show, turning a monster of the week nightmare into a puzzle about time, memory, and repetition. The mythology thickens through Season 3, as the tower, the tunnels, and the recurring symbol stop feeling like scattered set dressing and start locking together into a single design. Ethan keeps following the boy in white, whose guidance grows more urgent and more cryptic the closer the survivors edge toward the truth. Victor's drawings, once dismissed as the scribbles of a broken man, begin matching things the others are only now discovering. Nothing here is accidental. The season makes plain that every horror carries a shape and a purpose, even when the reason behind that purpose stays just out of reach. The Season 3 finale unloads the largest turning points the series had delivered up to that point. Answers arrive in a rush. Fatima gives birth at last, and what arrives proves the creatures cannot be permanently killed, no matter how many the survivors manage to put down. Around the same time, Tabitha and Jade both recover buried memories that reveal they are far more than two strangers who happen to get trapped, and their bond with this town reaches back well beyond a single lifetime. That final blow lands when a figure in a yellow suit steps fully into view for the first time and kills Jim, calmly presenting himself as the mind behind all of it. The full meaning of those recovered memories comes later in this story, once the timeline reaches that far back. Season 4 carries the war into broad daylight. The man in the yellow suit embeds himself in the town by taking the shape of a sheltered young woman named Sophia. And unlike the night creatures bound by darkness, he moves freely under the sun and works the residents from inside their own circle. He tests Sarah, bends Henry to his will, and studies the survivors the way a scientist watches insects in a jar. No wall or talisman stops him. That single change tilts the whole board, because the one defense the town leaned on for years means nothing against an enemy who strolls in wearing a friend's face at noon. Jade and Tabitha throw themselves at a single desperate mission, recovering the bones of children buried beneath the town, convinced those small remains hold the key to breaking the curse. A grim secret about Boyd surfaces along the way, as the audience learns he has quietly set aside one bullet for every living resident, a mercy plan for the day when a clean death might be the only kindness left to give. The weight of that choice never leaves him. Each step toward the bones pulls the survivors deeper into the tunnels and closer to the thing that has been steering their suffering from the start. Everything the season has built tightens toward a finale that tears the whole board apart. To reach the children's remains, the townspeople chain the bottle tree to a truck and rip it straight out of the earth, and the instant it tears loose, the sky itself revolts. Daylight dies in the middle of the afternoon. The ground bucks and cracks, red lightning rips across the clouds, and the careful order of the town dissolves into open panic within seconds. Everything unravels at once, faster than anyone can react. The finale spares almost no one from loss. Smiley, the reborn creature bound to Fatima, kills Marielle to test that link, gutting Christy in the process and proving how personal the monsters have learned to be. Elgin stumbles onto an old photograph that exposes how the man in yellow wears the faces of the dead, and he pays for that knowledge with his life moments later. two figures finally face each other in the open. The boy in white warns the man in yellow that he will lose this round now that the survivors hold the bones, and the man in yellow counters that the bottle tree is already gone, then hurls every last talisman down a bottomless tree, betting the town's despair will carry him through. Fatima, whose slow change has crept forward all season, fully becomes one of the creatures while somehow clinging to her own mind, and she chooses to stay behind in the tunnels so the others can climb out carrying the bones. Her final request is that they remember her as she was. By the time the survivors surface, the town has no talismans, no bottle tree, and no illusion of safety left to hold. Season 4 closes on a place thrown wide open, its people defenseless, the children's bones finally in their hands, and a single final season standing between them and the truth. That is where the story sits today. That is the shape of From. Across 4 seasons, the biggest moves on the board without the history or the reasons hiding beneath them. Everything from here runs deeper. We turn next to a theory that flips the entire tragedy on its head and points the finger at 2 people you would never suspect, then walk the town's history from its oldest carved dates all the way forward to this moment and close on the questions the final season still has to answer. Tabitha and Jade were the guilty ones. The most unsettling theory in the entire From community takes the show's biggest emotional reveal and turns it completely inside out. On screen, Tabitha and Jade are painted as tragic heroes, the one couple who refuse to go along with the horror and have been paying for their courage ever since. This theory argues the exact opposite. It claims that Tabitha and Jade are the guilty ones, the parents who sacrificed the children in the first place, and that the man in the yellow suit is not the villain of the story but the force punishing them for what they did. Everything you think you know about who deserves your sympathy flips in a single move. To understand the twist, you first need the version the show hands you. Late in Season 3, Tabitha and Jade recover memories, revealing they lived here long before their modern arrival, as a woman named Miranda and a man named Christopher. The story they piece together casts them as the only 2 people who tried to stop the original sacrifice of the children, failing at the worst possible moment and getting cursed to return again and again until they finally set things right. That framing turns their whole ordeal into a redemption arc. Each reincarnation becomes another chance to save the innocent, which is a comforting way to read a very uncomfortable mystery. The inversion theory pulls on one loose thread the show leaves dangling. Every piece of that heroic backstory comes from the memories of the 2 people it exonerates. Tabitha and Jade are the only witnesses to their own innocence, and they recovered those memories under enormous emotional strain, in a place that has already proven it can bend perception and rewrite what people believe. A confession of innocence from the accused is not the same as proof. Fans who back this theory point out that you would never take a suspect's own tearful account as the final word in any real investigation, and the town gives you every reason to distrust a tidy story that happens to make its tellers the victims. Consider how that innocent story actually reached them, because the method matters. The memories did not surface on their own. They came flooding back through a lullaby hidden in the bottle tree and played on Victor's old violin, using clues the town itself left lying around. A place that lies to people every single night handed these 2 the exact narrative that lets them off the hook. Convenient does not begin to cover it. When the only evidence of your innocence is a memory delivered by the same force that has spent centuries deceiving everyone who lives here, that evidence deserves a very hard second look, and that is precisely what this theory gives it. Look closely at the punishment itself and it starts to resemble exactly that. A punishment, being dragged back to the same nightmare across lifetimes, forced to watch children suffer and fail to save them over and over, reads less like a hero's mission and more like a sentence handed down by something that wants them to hurt. Even mainstream write-ups describe the reincarnation loop as a kind of eternal life sentence. Justice tends to work that way. A cosmology that punishes the guilty and frees the innocent would not trap 2 blameless people in an endless cycle of grief, which is the crack this theory drives straight through. The strongest evidence sits inside Christopher himself, the man Jade used to be. In the flashbacks to the old Massacre, Christopher grows cold and obsessive, consumed by the symbol until he stops resembling the loving figure he once was. Miranda does not hide the children from the monsters alone, she hides them from Christopher, tucking them into a cellar he does not know about, as if he had become something she needed to protect them from. That detail changes everything. If the mother felt she had to shield her own children from the father, then the father may sit far closer to the horror than the redemption story admits, and Jade carrying that same obsession with the symbol today looks less like a coincidence and more like a man sliding back into an old role. Watch Jade across Season 4 and the theory gains an eerie momentum. His obsession with the symbol has not faded now that he knows the truth, it has deepened, pulling him toward the same fixation that hollowed out Christopher all those years ago. Jade lies about the bones protecting the chamber, keeps his own counsel, and drifts further from the people who trust him, step by step retracing the path of the man he used to be. History does not just repeat here, it reincarnates. If Christopher was the one who let the darkness in, then a Jade quietly turning back into Christopher is the most dangerous thing happening in the town, hiding in plain sight behind a sympathetic face. There is one more clue folded into how the town treats these two differently from everyone else. According to the people who make the show, most residents got pulled into the town because they stood at a crossroads in their lives and answered the cries of the lost children, ordinary souls swept up like fish in a net. Tabitha and Jade are the exception to that rule. Their bond with the place predates every other arrival by centuries, and the town seems built around bringing them back specifically, again and again, which fits a pair of founders far better than a pair of bystanders. You do not construct an entire prison around two innocent tourists. The man in yellow fits this reading far better as a warden than as a devil. After the Season 4 finale, the show's own creative team described him as a being who feeds on suffering, someone who calls people back to the town so their pain can sustain him, and who is working the whole thing out in real time rather than steering it like an all-knowing god. A jailer also feeds on the misery of the imprisoned. Stripped of the assumption that he is pure evil, his behavior lines up neatly with a figure whose job is keeping the guilty locked in their sentence, punishing two souls who earned their place here rather than tormenting innocents for sport. The theory does not need him to be kind, only to be just. Flip the two mysterious figures and the whole board rearranges. If the man in yellow enforces a just sentence, then the silent boy in white, who guides Ethan, steers Tabitha up the tower, and keeps nudging this couple toward freedom, starts to look like the one working to spring the guilty. The two entities have circled each other for 4 seasons as obvious enemies, one pale and one gold, and viewers assume the child was the good one purely because of how he looks. Appearances have never been trustworthy in this town. A being helping the condemned slip their punishment would naturally wear a gentle, innocent form, which is exactly the kind of misdirection the show has pulled again and again. The town's obsession with a single word gives the theory its final piece. Everything here pushes toward remembering, from the carvings to the lullaby to the name the lost children carry, a name that translates to remember. A punishment built for the guilty would center on exactly that, forcing the ones responsible to relive and remember the crime they committed rather than letting them forget it in peace. Forgetting would be mercy. The cruelest sentence you could design for a parent who sacrificed their own child is an eternity of being made to remember it, and that is the machine the whole town appears to be, aimed squarely at the two people who keep being dragged back to feel it. That is what makes this theory so quietly disturbing to sit with. The figure everyone has spent 4 seasons fearing becomes something closer to a grim form of justice, and the two characters the audience has been trained to grieve for become the reason the town exists at all. Under this lens, the man in yellow punishing Tabitha and Jade is not cruelty. It is the price of a crime buried so deep in the past that even they manage to forget it. The victims and the villains trade places. Nobody in the town is simply good or simply evil, which is the kind of moral fog that has always made this show hard to look away from. None of this is confirmed, and the show still leans hard toward the gentler version of events. The writers have never called the man in yellow good, and they have never named Tabitha and Jade as the guilty parents, so the theory lives entirely in the gaps the story has not filled yet. There is also a fair counter-argument that the symbol was meant to help people remember rather than to kill, which would clear Christopher of being the original monster. Both readings can be argued from the same scenes. What gives this theory its staying power is not that anyone has proven it, it is that the show deliberately built its hero's innocence on the shakiest possible foundation, the word of the accused. Whether Tabitha and Jade are martyrs or culprits, the answer lives in the one place the show keeps circling back to, the town's buried past. To judge them fairly, you have to go back to the very beginning, to the oldest marks carved into the wood and the first children who were ever lost here. The deeper you dig, the stranger the timeline becomes. That history is where this whole nightmare was set in motion, long before any of the faces you know arrived, and it is exactly where we go next. Origins and the deep past. Long before the Matthews family ever took that wrong turn, the town was already ancient, already hungry, and already keeping count. Peel back the modern story of From, and you reach a deep past written in carved dates, buried children, and a crime old enough that the exact year has been lost. This section walks that history from its oldest clues forward. What the show buries in visions, wood carvings, and a timeline Jade sketches by hand points to a place that has been swallowing people for centuries, resetting itself again and again while the world outside forgot it existed. The horror you have been watching is only the latest turn of a very old wheel. Start with the numbers carved into the old lighthouse at the edge of town. Etched into its weathered wood sit a handful of years that surface again and again in the visions Tabitha and Jade cannot shake, a strange little ledger of dates stretching across 4 centuries. The oldest of them reaches all the way back to 1506, followed by 1609, then 1672, 1752, 1864, and finally 1931. None of those years belongs to anyone the survivors know. Each one lands roughly a century apart, which turns a random cluster of numbers into something that looks disturbingly like a schedule. Look harder at the spacing of those carved years, and the pattern refuses to sit still. The gaps between them run uneven. Roughly a century here, closer to 60 years there, as if the cycle speeds up and slows down according to rules no one has worked out. The lighthouse holds all of it. That crumbling tower works as the town's clock and its anchor at once, the fixed point where every era leaves its mark before the next one buries it, and the fact that Tabitha is drawn to climb it says the building remembers things the living residents cannot. Whatever resets the town keeps returning to that lighthouse, which makes it less a ruin and more the beating center of the whole design. Read as a pattern, those dates hint that the town does not simply exist, it repeats. Fans treat each carved year as the marker of another cycle, another turn of the same nightmare, as if the place burns itself down and rebuilds on a rhythm measured in generations. One year stands out from the rest, because 1864 shows up more than once, scratched into the lighthouse and also printed on a bottle hanging in the tree that guards the buried children. That doubling is not an accident. When the same year appears in 2 places tied to the town's darkest secrets, it starts to feel less like a date and more like an anniversary the town refuses to let go of. Underneath every one of those dates lies a single founding crime. The oldest story the town tells about itself is a bargain, a group of people who wanted to cheat death and found something willing to grant it. In exchange for never dying, they gave up the one thing that should have been unthinkable, their own children, sacrificing the young so the adults could live forever. That trade did not make them gods. It twisted them into the smiling creatures that stalk the tree line every night, immortal and hollow, sharing the same cursed ground as the descendants of the very evil they committed. The cruelest twist in the deep past is what became of the people who made that first bargain. Those smiling creatures are not invaders from somewhere else. They are the original townsfolk, the parents who traded their children and got immortality in the ugliest possible shape. Every monster clawing at a door was once a person who chose this. That is why they know the town so well, why they understand exactly how to lure and trick the living, because they were the living once, and the sacrifice that damned them is the same crime the survivors keep uncovering piece by piece. The enemy outside the walls is the town's own ancestry, still walking, still smiling, still refusing to die. One question towers over the entire origin, the matter of what these people actually bargained with. Something offered immortality in exchange for the children, something old enough to have been waiting in that forest before the first cabin ever went up. The show keeps two ancient figures circling this mystery, the man in yellow and the pale boy, and their roots reach as far back as the sacrifice itself. Neither one arrived recently. Whether the man in yellow struck the original bargain or came afterward to punish the ones who took it stays unanswered, yet his fingerprints sit on the oldest layer of the town, which means the deal and the dealer have been bound together since the very beginning. Not everyone in that first community agreed to the horror. Buried in the oldest layer of the story sits one married couple who tried to stop the sacrifice and failed, unable to save the children before the others went through with it. The next layer of the timeline grows up out of the ground itself, in the shape of the bottle tree. Somewhere around the 1600s, the tree that stands over the children's remains took its place at the heart of the town, hung with old glass bottles and marked with numbers scrawled on strips of birch bark. For years, those numbers looked like dates or a code no one could crack. They were music. The scratches turned out to be the notes of a lullaby meant to be played back to the buried children. And the twisting roots beneath that tree trace the exact three-lined symbol that haunts the whole series. Climbing forward through the centuries, the stonework comes next. The oldest surviving buildings, the church, and the deep stone foundations under the town seem to belong to the 1700s, raised by people who were already fighting to survive whatever the place had become. Protection came from stone as much as from prayer. The carved talismans that keep the creatures out, along with a ring of red stones tied to the town's early defenses, point to generations of trapped residents learning the same brutal lessons the modern survivors would learn all over again. Every era here rediscovers the same rules, because the town never lets anyone keep the answers for long. By the 1800s, a settlement of log cabins had risen deep in the forest, built in a protective circle around those red stones. This is the layer that ties the ancient past directly to Tabitha. As a little girl, long before she ever drove into the town, Tabitha dreamed of this exact place, a forest clearing she had no earthly way of knowing. And that childhood dream is one of the strongest signs that her connection to the town reaches back far beyond a single lifetime. Some threads run deeper than memory. The settlement stood as a fragile island of safety in a forest that has never once been safe, and its ruins still whisper to the people the town keeps calling home. The wheel keeps turning into the 1800s and drags the American Civil War into the town's orbit. Around 1861, the barn that later becomes a site of unspeakable cruelty was likely built, and a soldier from that war keeps surfacing in Jade's visions, dressed for a conflict that ended more than a century and a half ago. His presence carries a heavy implication. If a Civil War soldier walks through the town's memory, then the place has been pulling people off that lonely road for at least 160 years, era after era, uniform after uniform, feeding on whoever wandered too close. The faces change with the decades, but the hunger behind them never does. The most recent construction layer explains one of the show's creepiest details. Its diner, its motel, its clinic, and many of its houses appear to date from the 1950s, which is exactly the era the creatures seem frozen in. Look at the monsters, and they always wear mid-century clothing. They never age, and they only ever appear as adults, never as children. That is not a costume choice. The town seems to have locked a particular generation of the damned into place, dressing its predators in the fashions of the decade when the modern buildings went up, another quiet clue that the horror crested and set sometime around the middle of the last century. Strip away every building and two structures remain as the town's oldest bones, the lighthouse and the tunnels. That tower stands sentinel over the surface, while a spreading network of passages runs beneath the streets, older than the diner, older than the cabins, older than anyone can date. Tabitha's digging did not create those tunnels. Her dreams simply led her to something that had waited underground for centuries, a buried skeleton of chambers and roots wrapped around the remains of the sacrificed children which is why every road in the town's history seems to end below the earth rather than beyond the trees. The way out was never outward, it was always down, into the oldest part of the wound. Stack all of these layers on top of each other, and a clear shape emerges. The town is not a single place with a single beginning. It is sediment, built and burned and rebuilt across at least 5 centuries of trapped souls. Each carved date marks another reset, another generation lured in, used up, and paved over by the next. History here does not move in a line. It loops, the way the road loops, folding the 1600s and the 1950s and the present day into one continuous nightmare that has never truly stopped, only changed its clothes. One rule seems to govern every cycle in the town's long history, and it is a merciless one. Each new generation of the trapped starts from nothing, forced to relearn the talismans, the nightly lockdowns, and the creature's tricks from scratch, as if the answers reset along with the calendar. Knowledge here has a short life. The people who come closest to the truth tend to vanish, break, or die before they can pass it on, which keeps the town's oldest secret safe and its newest victims blind, and it explains why a place 5 centuries deep in horror still feels brand new to everyone who lands there. Forgetting is not an accident in this town, it is part of the machine. A fair warning belongs here, because much of this deep history is reconstruction rather than gospel. The clearest version of the timeline comes from a chart Jade draws by hand in Season 4, pieced together from visions, carvings, and the fragments Victor remembers, so the exact years carry more mystery than certainty. The bones of the story hold firm even when the dates wobble. What the show states plainly is the crime, the sacrifice, and the endless return, while the precise calendar behind it all stays deliberately smudged, waiting for a final season to sharpen the lines. For all its carved dates and buried centuries, the deep past mostly reaches us in fragments and dreams. Only once does the show pull back the curtain and let us watch a night like the founding sacrifice actually happen, through the eyes of a frightened boy who lived it and never left. That boy is Victor. The massacre he survived around 1981 is the clearest window into how this town turns on the people it traps, and the next stretch of the timeline steps out of legend and into living memory, into the single worst night the town ever showed us. Victor's Massacre. The deep past of From comes to us in fragments, but one night sits in sharper focus than any other, preserved inside the memory of the only person who lived through it. Around 1981, roughly 40 years before the modern survivors arrived, the town carried out a massacre that wiped out nearly everyone living there. A single child walked away. That child was Victor, and the show returns to his broken memories again and again because the night he survived is the closest thing we get to watching the town's cruelty play out from beginning to end. Everything the survivors face today rhymes with what happened to Victor's family. Victor came to the town as a boy of about 10, trapped the same way everyone is, riding in a car that took one wrong turn and never found its way out. Beside him were his mother, a gentle and haunted woman named Miranda, and his older sister Eloise, the three of them swallowed by the same road that swallows every family. Victor's father Henry never made that drive. Henry stayed behind in the outside world, unaware of what had taken his wife and children, which is why decades later a grieving old man would still be searching for answers about a family that vanished without a trace. The town did not just kill Victor's people, it split them across a wall that no grief could climb. Miranda arrived already tangled in the town before she ever saw it. For years, she experienced visions of the place, painting images she could not explain, and some of those paintings held the figure of the man in yellow long before she understood what he was. Her connection was no accident. Miranda carried the soul of one of those ancient women who first tried to stop the sacrifice, the same soul that would one day wake up inside Tabitha, which means the mother at the center of this massacre and the mother at the center of the modern story are two versions of the same person. The town had called her home, the way it always calls that soul home, to try and fail all over again. Sharing the town with them was Christopher, and his story is the one that curdles. Once a joyful entertainer who performed with a ventriloquist dummy named Jasper, Christopher arrived with warmth in him, the kind of man who made frightened people laugh. That warmth did not last. The symbol got into him, the same three-lined mark that runs through the whole series, and it hollowed him out from the inside, trading his humor for a cold and single-minded obsession that frightened the people closest to him. Christopher carried the soul that would later wake inside Jade, which is why the man Jade used to be matters so much, because the town has watched that soul turn dark once already. Moving through that summer like a quiet omen was the boy in white, already present in 1981 and looking exactly as he looks today. Young Victor watched Christopher hold private conversations with the pale child, and on one of those days the boy passed along a riddle that has echoed through every season since, that the answers to the end are hidden in the beginning. Victor carried the message straight to his mother. Miranda took it seriously, because a woman who had been painting this town in her sleep for years knew better than to ignore a warning wrapped in a riddle, and that single sentence became the seed of the desperate plan she would try that night. The same boy who guides Ethan now was already steering this family toward their fate decades ago. The day everything broke open began with two cars rolling into town, a detail that should send a chill through anyone who remembers how the modern story starts. Two cars arrived that morning in 1981, just as two cars would arrive the day the Matthews family and Jade got trapped, the town setting its stage the same way twice across 40 years. History was already rhyming. The arrivals stirred the town into motion, tension climbing through the streets as the residents sensed that something was coming, and by nightfall the fragile order that had held the place together would collapse into slaughter. Nothing about that symmetry feels like coincidence. Miranda pieced together what the riddle meant faster than anyone else could have. Guided by her visions and the boy's warning, she came to believe the trapped children could be freed at the tower, the tall stone lighthouse that has anchored the town's horror across every century. Her decision was made in an instant. Understanding that the creatures would come for everyone once darkness fell, Miranda chose to act that very night, gambling that she could reach the tower and undo the ancient sacrifice before the town could stop her. A mother walking willingly toward the most dangerous place in a deadly town tells you everything about how little choice she felt she had. Before she left, Miranda did the one thing that would matter most. She hid her children. Down in a root cellar beneath the town, a small buried space that Christopher did not know existed, she tucked Victor and Eloise away and told them to stay silent no matter what they heard above. That hiding place was chosen carefully. Miranda kept the cellar secret from Christopher specifically, sealing her children away from the man their father figure had become, which is one of the darkest details in the whole flashback, a mother shielding her children from someone who should have been shielding them too. She kissed them goodbye and climbed back into the dark, alone. Miranda never reached the tower. Somewhere on that final walk, near the bottle tree that guards the buried children, the smiley creature found her and killed her before she could complete whatever she had planned, cutting the rescue down within sight of its goal. Her courage bought nothing that night. The one person with the vision and the will to break the cycle died steps away from the place that might have ended it, and her failure sealed the same tragic pattern that had repeated for centuries. The resistor arriving too late, losing everything, and leaving the town exactly as cursed as before. Miranda fell, where so many versions of her had fallen already. With Miranda gone, the town came apart completely. The creatures swept through the streets that night and butchered nearly every soul living there, turning what had been a struggling community into a graveyard by morning. Only one heartbeat remained. Hidden in the root cellar where his mother had left him, Victor survived the slaughter that took Eloise and everyone else, listening in the dark to a horror no child should ever have to hear. When the sun finally rose, the boy climbed out into a town of corpses, the last living resident of a place that had erased his entire world in a single night. Eloise deserves more than a footnote in her brother's story. Victor's older sister died in that massacre alongside everyone else, and her loss became the wound that defined the rest of his long, lonely life in the town. Fans spent years hoping she had somehow survived. A popular theory held that Eloise escaped the slaughter and lived on somewhere in the town's tangled timeline, until the people behind the show finally closed the door on it, stating plainly that Eloise is dead and always has been. Her death is one of the few facts the creators have refused to soften, a reminder that the town does not hand out miracles, it only hands out survivors like Victor who almost wish they had not made it. One question hangs over the whole massacre, the matter of why Victor lived when the town spared no one else. The root cellar hid him, yet the town has never had trouble finding people who hide, which suggests his survival was allowed rather than accidental. The boy in white wanted him alive. That pale figure returned for Victor the moment the killing ended, guiding him, giving him tasks, keeping him tethered to the town for the next 40 years, as if the boy needed a living witness to carry the memory forward until the right souls returned. Victor was not simply the one who got lucky, he was the one chosen to remember, held in place like a bookmark until the story was ready to turn its next page. What Victor did next shaped the town for the next 40 years. The boy in white returned to guide the orphaned child, setting him to work in the wreckage the way he now guides Ethan. Victor gathered the cars of the dead and moved them to a clearing that became the car graveyard, then collected the most precious belongings of the people who had died and buried them together inside a suitcase. Following the pale boy's instructions without fully understanding them, grief became routine for him. A 10-year-old spent those days tidying the evidence of a massacre, and in doing so he became the keeper of the town's memory, the one witness who carried the truth of that night into every season that followed. That night never let go of Victor, and it never let him grow up either. Trapped in the town for decades, he aged in body while staying frozen somewhere in that terrified childhood, which is why the Victor the modern survivors meet speaks in fragments, hands out crayon drawings, and flinches from the truth he carries. The trauma rewired him. His broken mind became the town's most valuable archive and its most heartbreaking casualty at once. A living history book written in a language of fear that almost no one can read, holding the answers everyone needs inside a man too wounded to simply explain them. The boy who survived became the saddest kind of survivor. Victor's massacre is not just a sad backstory, it is the blueprint for everything that comes after. A family lured in, a soul that turns dark, a mother who tries and fails to save the children, a rescue that dies within reach of the tower, all of it would play out again in the modern story, with new names and the same aching shape. The town had found its rhythm. After that terrible night, decades passed with Victor alone among ghosts, until the road began delivering fresh victims once more, one car at a time, rebuilding a population out of strangers who had no idea they were walking into a pattern centuries in the making. The next arrivals would slowly turn a town of corpses back into a town of the living, and their story is where the timeline picks up next. The modern arrivals and the Talismans. The road eventually stirred back to life, and beginning around 2018, it started delivering new victims again, rebuilding a population one carload of strangers at a time. This is where the modern town takes shape. Over roughly 4 years, a fresh community of people got trapped, learned the rules the hard way, and stumbled onto the single discovery that turned certain death into something survivable. All of it setting the stage for the story most viewers know. The people who arrived in these years are the ones who would still be fighting when the Matthews family showed up. Donna Raines reached the town in the summer of 2018, driving through Montana with her sister when the road folded them in like everyone before them. That first night took her sister. Losing the one person she had arrived with taught Donna the town's cruelest lesson immediately, that the place gives you no time to adjust before it starts taking, and that hard early grief forged her into one of the toughest survivors the show would ever follow. Donna did not break under it. She hardened instead, and years later, that steel would make her the natural leader of an entire community. The town Donna landed in offered no real defense against the dark. Before anyone understood the Talismans, every night was a gamble with terrible odds, the creatures walking freely into homes and dragging people out while the survivors could do little more than hide and pray. Death came fast and often. New arrivals in those years faced a place that seemed built purely to kill them, with no strategy, no safe houses, and no reason to believe anyone could last, which makes the discovery that followed all the more staggering. Survival in the early modern town was mostly a matter of luck running out slower for some than for others. Boyd Stevens arrived in November of 2019, and his coming would change the town more than anyone's. A military veteran driving from Virginia toward North Carolina, Boyd got trapped alongside his wife Abby and his son Ellis, an ordinary family funneled onto that endless road like all the rest. Steadiness came naturally to him. The years of service had given Boyd a calm under pressure that the place desperately needed, yet nothing in his training prepared him for what the town would do to the woman he loved. And his first real tragedy here would define the grim, dutiful man the survivors come to rely on. The town broke Abby the way it breaks so many. Her grip on reality slipped under the constant terror, and one day her shattered mind turned her into a danger to the very people she had come here with, as she took up a gun and began firing on her neighbors in the street. Boyd faced an impossible choice. When Abby turned that weapon toward their own family, he did the unthinkable to protect them, ending his wife's life with his own hands to stop her from taking anyone else, a wound that never healed and never stopped shaping him. Everything steady and haunted about Boyd traces back to that single, unbearable morning. Out of that grief came the discovery that saved everyone who followed. Chasing a stray dog into the forest one day, Boyd got lost and stumbled into a hidden cave lined with the small carved talismans, and he worked out that the creatures would not come near them. That accident rewrote the rules. For the first time in the town's brutal modern history, someone had found a reliable defense against the dark, a way to make a doorway or a window truly safe, and Boyd carried that knowledge back, like a man returning with fire. The Talismans turned a death trap into a place where people could actually build a life. Everything about daily life shifted once the Talismans spread through town. People moved out of hiding and into the houses, the diner, and the clinic, hanging the charms over every entrance and reclaiming a fragile sense of normal life. Nights stopped being a guaranteed slaughter. The creatures still prowled and still killed anyone careless enough to break the rules, but the residents finally had a fighting chance, and a scattering of terrified strangers slowly organized itself into something that resembled a real community. Boyd's cave turned survival from a nightly miracle into a system that ordinary people could follow. Safety brought a new kind of conflict, the argument over what the town should even be. Two philosophies split the survivors apart. One centered in the main town under Boyd, where the rules stayed strict and the goal remained getting everyone home, and the other rooted at Colony House under Donna, where people chose to stop clawing at the exit and build a livable life inside the trap. Neither side was wrong, exactly. Every newcomer eventually had to pick between the two, a choice that could not be undone once made, and that quiet divide between hoping to leave and learning to stay would shape the town's politics for years. The split was less about walls than about whether these people still believed in a future beyond the tree line. Life in the settled town organized itself around a handful of fixed points and one iron routine. The diner served as the town's gathering place, the clinic patched up the wounded, the church offered a little peace, and the sheriff's station kept a rough order, all of it clustered under the shadow of the forest that hemmed everyone in. Every evening ended the same way. Before dark, people scattered to their homes and sealed themselves in behind the Talismans, a nightly retreat that turned sundown into a communal ritual of fear. While out at Colony House, Donna ran her own household on gentler terms, closer to a commune than a fortress. The two centers of town life sat only a short walk apart, yet believed in almost opposite futures. The choice between town and Colony House cut deeper than politics, because it could split the people who arrived together. Once a newcomer picked a side, that decision locked in for good, and families or friends who chose differently found themselves living apart in a place where every night might be their last together. Loyalty and hope pulled in opposite directions. Some clung to the strict discipline of the town and its promise of going home, others surrendered to Colony House and its permission to simply live. And the space between those two answers quietly broke apart more than one bond long before the creatures ever got the chance. The town did not need monsters to divide people, it only needed to offer them a choice. The population kept growing as the road delivered the faces that would carry the whole series. Father Cautry had arrived in 2019, a priest fleeing a tragedy of his own, and the year 2021 brought a rush of new souls, including Fatima, the botanist who joined Colony House, the Liu family whose matriarch Tian Chen took over the diner, and the Dr. Christy Miller, who set up the clinic that would save countless lives. Kenny stepped up as Boyd's deputy around then. Sarah and her brother Nathan came that autumn too, and with each arrival the town filled out into the ensemble whose fates the modern seasons would follow, a cast of ordinary people bound together by an impossible situation. For Victor, the arrival of all these strangers carried a weight no one else could feel. He had watched the town empty out, and now watched it fill again, recognizing in every frightened new face the same doomed hope his mother once carried, and knowing better than anyone how the story tended to end. The newcomers saw only a strange old man. To them, Victor was a harmless eccentric who drew pictures and muttered riddles, never guessing that the childlike figure shuffling through the diner held 40 years of the town's darkest answers, waiting for someone finally able to hear them. Victor had become a living warning that no one knew how to read. One hard truth sat beneath all this careful order, the fact that surviving the night was never the same as getting out. 4 years of trapped people had built routines, defenses, and even a fragile sense of home, yet not a single soul had ever found the road that led away from the town. Escape stayed a fantasy. The community could keep people alive from one sunrise to the next, but it could not answer the question that haunted every resident lying awake behind their talismans, and that slow grind of endless survival without progress wore people down as surely as any monster. Staying alive in the town was an achievement that solved nothing at all. By late 2021, the town reached a stretch of calm it had almost never known. After the last death that November, the residents strung together 96 nights in a row without losing a single person, the longest peace in living memory, enough to let people believe the worst might finally be behind them. That hope did not survive February. On the 19th, the creature shattered the streak when the old lady creature coaxed a girl named Megan Pratt into opening a window while her father sat passed out drunk at the bar, killing Megan and her mother in one stroke. 96 nights of safety ended in a single careless moment, exactly the way the town likes to remind everyone that it is never truly beaten. That broken streak set the table for everything the show would become. One day after the Pratt family died, the road delivered 2 more cars, and this is where the story most viewers know finally begins. A family named Matthews and a young man named Jade rolled into a town already full of survivors, rules, factions, and grief, walking straight into a community that had spent 4 years learning to endure the exact nightmare now closing around them. The town Victor once kept alone had become a crowded stage, and the next arrivals would light the fuse on the whole modern tragedy. 2 cars and the present day. The present-day story of From begins on February 20th, 2022, the day 2 cars rolled into town and the whole modern tragedy started. Watch it closely, and you are watching Victor's massacre happen all over again, slowed down across 4 seasons and dressed in new faces. The pattern never changed. A family gets lured in, a dark soul arrives with them, a mother feels the pull of the tower, and the town sharpens its knives, exactly as it did in 1981. Only this time the show lets us live inside every step. This section walks the present day from that first collision through the moment the town's oldest wall finally cracked. The arrival itself carried the town's grim sense of humor. Tabitha and Jim Matthews were driving their family across the country with their kids Julie and Ethan when the road looped them in, and at the very same moment, a young man named Jade rolled in from the opposite direction with his friend Toby. Their 2 cars crashed straight into each other. 2 vehicles arriving from different lives, colliding on the same cursed road at the same instant, echoed the 2 cars that had signaled the massacre decades before. And anyone who knew the town's history would have felt the dread settle in right there. The wreck was the town's way of announcing that the cycle had begun again. The town wasted no time proving what kind of place it was. That first night, a troubled resident named Sarah, obeying the voices that had begun whispering to her, murdered Jade's friend Toby and then left the clinic door hanging open, an act that let the creatures slip in and kill others while everyone slept. 3 people died before the newcomers even understood the rules. Welcome to the town meant burying strangers by the second morning, and the sheer speed of that opening bloodshed told the Matthews family that nowhere here was safe and no night could be trusted. The place introduced itself in corpses. Jade's transformation deserves its own attention, because it started the moment he arrived. Losing Toby on that first night left Jade rattled, and rather than break down, he turned inward, latching onto the strange three-lined symbol as if solving it might explain the death he could not accept. Obsession found him quickly. What began as a sarcastic outsider poking at a puzzle slowly curdled into a fixation that consumed more and more of him, and anyone tracking the town's history could see the shadow of Christopher falling across Jade, long before either man understood they shared a soul. The symbol always finds the same person, no matter which lifetime he is living. 2 days later, on February 22nd, the town put the newcomers through its strangest ritual, the choosing ceremony. Every fresh arrival had to stand before the community and pick a side, either the disciplined main town or the gentler colony house, knowing the decision could never be reversed. The Matthews family did not choose together. Jim, Tabitha, and young Ethan committed to the town, and Jade threw in with them. But teenage Julie chose Colony House and walked away from her own parents, splitting the family across the very divide that had fractured the town for years. A mother and father watched their daughter pick a different home in a place where every goodbye might be the last one. The town also revealed how it dealt with its own guilty. Frank Pratt, the drunk father whose passed-out negligence had gotten his wife and daughter killed just before the Matthews arrived, faced the town's brutal form of justice, a punishment the residents grimly called the box. Mercy was in short supply. Rather than jail him, the community sentenced Frank to be left outside in a locked box overnight, delivered straight into the hands of the creatures, an execution dressed up as a verdict. Watching the town calmly hand one of their own to the monsters showed the newcomers that survival here had hardened these people into something willing to kill to keep order. Jim clung to engineering the way drowning men clutched driftwood, and he threw himself into building a radio tower to reach the outside world. A voice answered through the static, but instead of rescue, it delivered a warning that his wife should not be digging that hole. That message was not new. The town had aimed nearly identical words at Miranda's world decades earlier, and hearing the same warning surface again marked Jim as the latest outsider trying to solve with logic a place that runs on something far older than reason. Every generation sends up its signal, and every generation gets the same answer. Tabitha, meanwhile, felt the same pull that had drawn every version of her soul toward the town's buried heart. Dreams she could not explain led her to dig beneath her own house, uncovering the ancient tunnels that run under the streets. And the first season ended with her home collapsing into the very passages she had opened. Miranda had felt that pull too. The modern mother was retracing the exact steps of the woman she used to be, drawn underground toward the children and the tower, which meant the audience was watching a centuries-old compulsion play out through a woman who did not yet know she had lived it before. The town was calling its oldest soul home again. Ethan carried a role in the present day that mirrored Victor's role in the past. The town's newest child became its clearest channel to the boy in white, who appeared to Ethan the way he once appeared to Victor, feeding the boy clues wrapped in the language of the fantasy game Ethan used to survive his fear. Children see what adults refuse to. Because Ethan approached the horror as a quest rather than a trap, he stayed open to the pale boy's guidance while the grown-ups dismissed it, which turned the youngest Matthews into an unlikely key to secrets the adults kept fumbling. One more echo of a town that has always spoken loudest to its children. The pattern needed a boy, and it found one again. Julie's choice to live at Colony House sent her down a path apart from the family she arrived with. Building a life among Donna's people, she formed new bonds and grew into her own person, even as the distance from her parents ached across a town where separation could turn permanent overnight. Growing up here meant growing up fast. Julie's storyline carried the emotional cost of the town's central divide. A teenager caught between her mother's obsession, her father's stubborn logic, and her own need to simply live, and her arc quietly set up a stranger destiny that later seasons would reveal. The daughter who walked away would turn out to matter more than anyone guessed. Season 2 opened the town wider when the Grand Rapids Runner Bus tore into the streets on March 3, 2022, spilling a fresh crowd of terrified passengers into an already crowded nightmare. Among the new faces were the volatile Randall and the quiet, haunted Elgin, each dragging their own baggage into the mix. The town stopped feeling like a haunting and started feeling like a puzzle. Where the survivors had once focused on simply outlasting the night, they now began digging into the how and the why of the place, hunting for patterns in the symbol, the tunnels, and the tower, which shifted the whole story from pure survival toward the slow, dangerous work of understanding. Curiosity became its own kind of risk. Every so often, someone in the town convinced themselves they could simply leave, and the road always proved them wrong. People walked for hours down the only route out, only to find it curving back on itself and depositing them exactly where they started, the same trick that trapped the buses and the cars in the first place. Distance meant nothing here. The town did not rely on walls or fences to hold its prisoners. It bent space itself, folding every escape attempt into a slow return, which is why the survivors eventually stopped looking outward and started looking down and up toward the tunnels and the tower. The only cracks in the prison were never on the road at all. Boyd's journey that season took him straight down into the town's oldest wound. Descending into a pit the survivors called the dungeon, he found a shackled prisoner named Martin, a man left chained in the dark for reasons no one fully grasped, along with an old music box that would soon spread its own horror through the town. Going down was the whole point. The town had always hinted that its truths lay beneath the surface rather than beyond the trees, and Boyd's descent into that buried chamber fit the pattern, dragging him closer to the source of everything even as it infected him with the parasitic worms that let him kill his first monster. The way forward kept leading underground. Season 2 paid off its mysteries in a rush, before delivering the biggest shock of all. The survivors learned that Fatima was somehow pregnant, that Jade's haunting symbol traced the roots beneath the bottle tree, and that a nightmare tied to that music box could kill people in their sleep, each discovery tightening the net around the town's secret. Then Tabitha climbed the tower. Drawn to the same stone lighthouse that Miranda had died trying to reach 40 years earlier, Tabitha ascended it, only this time the pattern broke, because the boy in white pushed her from a high window and she woke in a hospital in Maine, alive and outside the town for the first time in the show's history. Where Miranda had fallen and died, her modern self fell and lived. That escape changed everything the town thought it knew about its own walls. For the first time, someone had left alive, proving the prison was not as sealed as centuries of death had suggested, and the question of how Tabitha got out would crack the whole mystery wide open in the season that followed. The pattern had finally slipped. Season 3 would take that crack and pry it apart, dragging the survivors past the monsters and into the buried truth of who Tabitha and Jade really were. And that is where the timeline turns next, into the revelations that rewrote the entire story. The revelations. Season 3 is the moment from stopped whispering and finally started answering. For 2 seasons the show had teased its mysteries, doling out clues while burying the truth, and this third run pulled the floor out from under everyone by revealing what the town actually is. The whole premise changed here. What had looked like a survival story about monsters and talismans revealed itself as something stranger and sadder, a tale of reincarnation, buried memory, and an ancient intelligence running the entire nightmare. And by the final minutes, the survivors understood they had never been fighting a haunted place. They had been trapped inside a designed one. This is the season that rewrote everything that came before it. Before the answers arrived, the town turned crueler than it had ever been. The creatures abandoned quick killings in favor of slow, theatrical torment, and the season's darkest hour came when the beloved diner owner Tian Chen was tortured to death in a barn while Boyd was forced to watch. Something had shifted in the monsters. Their new sadism felt personal, as if the town had grown tired of merely frightening its prisoners and decided to break their spirits instead, which set a grim, heavy mood for a season that would spend its energy dragging long-buried secrets into the open. The horror got quieter and far more intimate. Tabitha's escape to Maine opened a door the show had never walked through before, the world outside the town. Following the thread of her recovered life, she tracked down pieces of Victor's history and met an elderly man named Henry, who turned out to be Victor's own father. Still grieving a family that had vanished decades ago, every answer pulled her back inward. The outside world, rather than offering freedom, kept feeding Tabitha clues that pointed straight back to the town and to the ancient role she did not yet know she carried, which meant even her escape had become part of the town's design. Leaving had only deepened the mystery. Julie's storyline delivered the season's first true reveal that she could move through the town's own timeline. The survivors came to understand that Julie was a storywalker, able to slip backward into moments she had no natural way of reaching, which turned her into a living thread stitching different points of the story together. Time itself was on the table now. In the strangest twist, Julie reached back through the timeline to save Boyd during his ordeal in the dungeon, throwing him a rope from a moment that logically should not have connected to his, a loop that folded the story in on itself. From that point forward, the show was no longer only about surviving the town, it was about untangling a place where past and present had stopped staying in their lanes. Victor moved from the margins to the center of the story as Season 3 unfolded. For decades, the survivors had treated him as a harmless curiosity, but the answers everyone needed turned out to live inside his fractured memory and his belongings, including the very violin that would unlock the truth. The broken man became the key. Piece by piece, the survivors learned to read Victor's drawings and coax fragments out of his guarded mind, and the child who had buried the dead 40 years earlier finally began handing the town's history to the people who could act on it. The keeper the town had frozen in place was ready, at last, to be heard. All of it converged in a two-part finale, the show titled Revelations, and the name was a promise it kept. Within those closing episodes, the town finally paid off the questions it had been hoarding since the very first night, stacking one enormous reveal on top of another until almost nothing looked the way it had an hour earlier. The dam simply broke. Years of careful mystery gave way to a flood of answers about the children, the symbol, the reincarnations, and the force behind it all, delivered fast enough to leave the audience reeling. And every one of those revelations reshaped the story in a way the final seasons would have to reckon with. Nothing about the show stayed the same after that night. The first blow landed with Fatima. After a pregnancy that never should have been possible, she gave birth, and what she delivered was not a normal child but the reborn form of Smiley, the same creature Boyd had killed seasons earlier. Death meant nothing to the monsters. That single horrifying birth proved the town's darkest rule, that its creatures cannot be permanently destroyed, and that every monster the survivors managed to put down would simply return through some new and unnatural door. Fatima's baby turned the survivors' one real victory, the killing of a creature, into a bitter joke the town had been playing all along. The heart of the season beat inside a single piece of music. Jade finally cracked the numbers, scratched into the bottle tree, realizing they were the notes of a lullaby, and when he played that melody on Victor's old violin, the sound reached back through the centuries and unlocked everything. Memory poured out of them. Tabitha and Jade remembered, in one overwhelming rush, that they had lived here before as Miranda and Christopher, and further back as the couple who failed to save their own daughter from the sacrifice. Two souls the town had been dragging home across lifetimes. A simple lullaby, meant for buried children, tore the truth of who they were, wide open in a single scene. Remembering did not bring Tabitha and Jade any peace, it handed them a burden almost too heavy to carry. Learning that they had failed to save their own children not once but across lifetimes crushed them under a grief that stretched back centuries, and the two of them wore that knowledge differently. Tabitha turned her pain into resolve. Jade sank deeper into the symbol and the mystery, growing more withdrawn and driven as the weight of a soul that had failed so many times pressed down on him, and their split reactions hinted at very different roads ahead. Knowing the truth about yourself, the season suggested, can wound as deeply as any monster. Woven through those revelations was the meaning of a word the show had been repeating for seasons, the strange term Ankui. It belonged to the sacrificed children, and its translation gave the whole town its purpose, because Ankui means remember. Everything clicked into place around that single word. The carvings, the lullaby, the visions, and the endless return of the same souls all pointed toward one demand: that someone finally remember the children who were sacrificed and the crime that damned the town. And suddenly the entire nightmare read like a plea and a punishment rolled into one. A place built to make people remember had spent centuries refusing to let anyone forget. One more revelation reframed the symbol that had haunted the survivors since the beginning. Far from a mark of the monsters, the three-lined shape had grown from the sacrificed children themselves, formed out of their hope, as their remains lay tangled in the roots beneath the bottle tree. The children were never truly gone. Their presence lingered in the walls and the tunnels of the town, waiting to be remembered and freed. And Season 3 planted the idea that their buried bones might be the one thing capable of ending the cycle, a thread the survivors would chase straight through the following season. What had seemed like a symbol of doom turned out to be a cry for help. The season saved its most chilling reveal for last, the first real appearance of the man in the yellow suit. Stepping out of the shadows he had lurked in for 2 seasons, the figure finally showed himself and killed Jim Matthews, telling him that knowledge always comes with a price and that his wife never should have dug that hole. Those words gave the game away. That same warning had first crackled through Jim's radio back in Season 1, which meant the man in yellow had been watching, speaking, and steering events from the very beginning, and eagle-eyed viewers realized he had even appeared hidden inside Miranda's old paintings. The mastermind behind the entire nightmare finally had a face. Jim's death cut deeper than a single loss, because it broke the Matthews family at its foundation. The steady, logical father who had spent 2 seasons trying to engineer his way home died at the hands of the very intelligence he could never quite bring himself to believe in, leaving Tabitha, Julie, and Ethan to face the endgame without him. His faith in reason died with him. Season 3 also sharpened the sense that 2 ancient forces were circling the town, the man in yellow on one side and the pale boy in white on the other. Opponents in a contest the survivors had only begun to notice, which reframed every strange event as a move in a much larger game. The town was not chaos, it was a battlefield. By the end of those 2 episodes, From was a fundamentally different show. The survivors no longer faced a random haunted town, they faced a deliberate prison with an author, a place built around a crime, a punishment, and a will that wanted them to suffer and remember. Everything gained a terrible purpose. The monsters, the talismans, the reincarnations, and the endless cycle all clicked into a single design overseen by the man in yellow, and the people trapped inside finally grasped that escaping would mean outwitting an intelligence far older and stranger than any of them. Understanding the town had made it infinitely more frightening. Season 3 left the town cracked open, and its true enemy standing in plain sight. The man in yellow had a face now. The survivors knew their own buried history, and the bones of the sacrificed children waited underground as the key to everything. The endgame was about to begin. Season 4 would drag that shadowy figure fully into the daylight and push the survivors toward their most desperate gamble yet. And that final stretch of the aired story is where the timeline goes next, into the season that set the stage for the end. The Endgame Begins. Season 4 is where the long cycle finally tips toward its ending. For 3 seasons, the man in yellow had stayed a rumor, a voice on a radio, and a figure in the dark. But this 4th run brought him into the open and set the whole town on a collision course with the truth. The endgame started here. Everything the timeline has built toward, the sacrifice, the reincarnations, the buried children, and the ancient warden watching over it all, came to a head in a season that spent its final hour dismantling every defense the survivors had, leaving them more exposed than any generation before them. This is the last chapter of the story that is actually aired, and it ends with the town blown wide open. The season's masterstroke was how the man in yellow chose to hide. Rather than lurking in the shadows, he walked into town wearing the face of a sheltered young woman named Sophia, a pastor's daughter so innocent that no one thought to suspect her. The perfect disguise was harmlessness. By arriving as a frightened newcomer who seemed to need protecting, the entity slipped past every defense the survivors had built, settling into the community as one of them, while quietly steering events toward catastrophe. and the town welcomed its own destroyer through the front door. Nobody watches the lamb when they are guarding against the wolf. Sophia broke the one rule the survivors thought they could count on. Every creature they had ever faced belonged to the night, bound by darkness and held back by talismans, but the man in yellow moved freely in broad daylight, untouched by the charms that stopped everything else. Daytime stopped being safe. That single difference stripped away the survivors' last reliable comfort, the knowledge that sunrise meant survival, and it announced that this enemy played by rules entirely his own, older and deeper than the ones the town had spent years learning. The monster who walks at noon is the one you never see coming. Worse still, the man in yellow could wear more than one face. Beyond his Sophia disguise, he took the forms of townspeople who had already died, slipping into the shapes of the dead to deceive and unsettle the living whenever it suited him. Trust became impossible. A friend or a lost loved one might really be the enemy in borrowed skin, which poisoned every relationship in a town that already ran on fragile trust, and the survivors could no longer be certain that the person standing beside them was who they appeared to be. Grief itself became a weapon he could turn against them. From inside the community, the man in yellow went to work on the survivors one by one. He tested Sarah, probing the guilt and the voices that had always made her vulnerable. He tightened his grip on a woman named Clara and bent her to his purposes, and he reached into Henry, hypnotizing Victor's grieving father and using him as a tool. Every kindness became a trap. The entity understood these people's wounds better than they did, exploiting love, guilt, and grief to turn the survivors against one another. And the town slowly realized that its greatest danger was no longer the creatures in the forest but the friend who had moved in among them. He fought them with their own hearts. One of the season's quieter tragedies belonged to Henry, the father Tabitha had met in the outside world. Drawn by the same pull that traps everyone, Henry made his way into the town and finally reunited with Victor, the little boy he had lost decades earlier, now a broken old man himself. Their reunion should have been a mercy. Instead, the man in yellow seized on Henry's fragile, grieving mind, hypnotizing the old man and turning a father's love into a tool against the very people trying to survive, which twisted one of the show's few tender threads into another weapon. Even a reunion 40 years in the making became something the town could poison. Knowing the truth changed how the survivors carried themselves through this final aired season. No longer able to pretend they faced a simple haunting, they now understood they were pieces in an ancient design, hunted by an intelligence that wanted them broken, and that knowledge pressed down on the whole community. Despair spread faster than the creatures. Some people hardened into grim determination, others cracked under the hopelessness, and the town that had once organized itself around routines and rules began to fray as the survivors grasped how deep and old their prison really was. Understanding the trap made living inside it almost unbearable. Amid all the dread, the bond between Christy and Marielle offered one of the few lights left in the town. The doctor and her partner had built something real together, a small pocket of love and normalcy that gave the survivors a reason to believe a life here was still worth living. Their happiness was borrowed time. The town rarely lets tenderness last, and the closer the couple grew, the more their relationship became a target, which is exactly why Marielle's death in the finale landed as such a brutal blow, tearing away one of the last reasons Christy had to keep going. Love in this place has always been the thing the town takes first. While the man in yellow worked his manipulations, a different horror unfolded around Fatima. The creature she had given birth to, the reborn Smiley, was slowly turning her into one of them, and her body began to fail in ways the clinic could not explain, her heart rate crawling down toward a level no living person should survive. Fatima was becoming a monster. A strange psychic link bound her to Smiley, letting the creature feel what she felt and pulling her further from her own humanity with every passing day, while Ellis could only watch the woman he loved disappear inside something inhuman. Her transformation was the season's slow, unbearable heartbeat. Against all of it, Jade and Tabitha threw everything into a single desperate plan, recovering the bones of the sacrificed children. Season 3 had planted the idea that those small remains might be the key to breaking the cycle, and now the two of them descended into the tunnels to find and free them, chasing the one thread that seemed to offer a way out. Desperation drove Jade hardest. The soul that had failed these children across lifetimes pushed him toward the bones with a single-minded intensity that unsettled even the people helping him. And the mission carried the weight of centuries of guilt riding on two people who had run out of other options. Everything came down to a handful of bones in the dark. Boyd carried a secret through the season that revealed just how hopeless he had come to feel. Somewhere along the way, the sheriff had quietly set aside a single bullet for every living resident of the town, a mercy plan for the moment when a clean death might be the only gift left to give. Hope had grown that thin. The man who had held the community together for years was privately preparing to end it painlessly if everything collapsed, and that grim stockpile spoke louder than any speech about how close the survivors stood to the edge. Boyd loved these people enough to plan their deaths. For all the despair, Season 4 carried a fragile sense that this cycle might finally be different. Never before had so many of the right pieces sat on the board at once, with Tabitha and Jade awake to their ancient past, Julie able to walk through time, Ethan open to the boy in white, and the children's bones located after centuries of being lost. The pattern had never lined up this way. Every earlier turn of the wheel had ended in failure and forgetting. Yet this generation carried knowledge and tools no previous one had held together, which is exactly why the man in yellow moved so aggressively to tear their defenses down. The town seemed to sense that this time, the story could actually end. To reach the buried children and open a way down to them, the townspeople chained the great bottle tree to a truck and tore it out of the ground by force. Jade had been hiding something. He finally admitted that his earlier claim about the bones protecting the chamber had been a lie, and in a burst of guilt, he tried to sacrifice himself for the mission, a last attempt by an ancient soul to finally get one thing right. The plan hinged on ripping out the very tree that had anchored the town for centuries. Tearing out the bottle tree woke something ancient and furious. The moment the roots ripped free, the sky itself seemed to revolt. As daylight died in the middle of the afternoon, the ground buckled in a violent earthquake, and red lightning split the clouds above the panicking town. Safe hours were gone now. Ripping out the tree also disabled the talisman that had long protected the car graveyard, stripping away one more layer of defense in a single stroke, and the survivors suddenly found themselves exposed in an unnatural darkness with the creatures closing in. The town had never looked so much like the end of the world. The chaos gave the man in yellow and his creatures the opening to strike. Smiley murdered Marielle to test the psychic link he shared with Fatima, a killing that gutted Christie and proved how cruelly personal the monsters had become. Elgin paid an even stranger price. He stumbled onto an old photograph that exposed the man in yellow's habit of wearing the faces of the dead, and the moment he understood the secret, Sophia killed him to keep it buried, silencing the one person who had pieced together the enemy's oldest trick. Knowledge in this town has always come with a body count. Fatima's story reached its devastating peak in those final minutes. Her transformation completed at last, turning her fully into one of the creatures. Yet she held on to her own mind even as her body changed, refusing to lose herself entirely. Humanity survived inside the monster. Choosing to stay behind in the tunnels, Fatima held the creatures off so the others could escape with the bones, and her last words to Ellis asked only that he remember her as she had been, not as the thing she was becoming. She saved them all by sacrificing the last of who she was. The season ended on a confrontation between the two ancient forces. Facing the man in yellow, the boy in white declared that this time the survivors would win, because they finally held the children's bones, and for a moment it seemed the tide had turned. That hope lasted only seconds. Answering him, the man in yellow revealed that the bottle tree was already gone, and he dumped every last protective talisman down a bottomless tree, stripping the town of the one defense that had kept the creatures out for generations and leaving its people utterly exposed heading into the final season. Having now walked the entire timeline from its oldest carved date to this last catastrophe, the story steps back next to examine the hidden details and secrets stitched through the whole show. Easter eggs and hidden clues. Beyond its story, From is packed with hidden details, buried references, and clues planted for viewers paying close attention. This section steps away from the timeline to look at the show as a piece of craft, at the Easter eggs, the musical choices, and the long-game foreshadowing woven through every season. The rewards here go to the rewatchers. Small things that seemed like background noise on a first viewing turn out to be deliberate signposts, and the deeper you look, the clearer it becomes that the people behind this show hid a second layer underneath the horror, one built for the fans who never stop searching. These are the secrets that reward a closer look. The biggest Easter egg of all is the show's deep connection to Lost. Harold Perrineau, who anchors From as Boyd, spent years on that legendary island mystery playing Michael Dawson, which means the actor at the center of one trapped and searching nightmare had already survived another. The pedigree runs behind the camera too. Jack Bender, who directed some of Lost's most famous hours, and Jeff Pinkner, a veteran of both Lost and Fringe, helped shape From, bringing the same instincts for slow-burn mystery and emotional gut punches that made their earlier work so addictive. From did not just resemble Lost by accident, it was built by people who helped define it. The similarities go far deeper than a shared cast member. Both shows drop ordinary people into an inescapable place governed by strange rules. Both bury a vast mythology under a monster-of-the-week surface, and both kill major characters without warning to remind you that no one is safe. Time itself bends in each. Just as Lost twisted its timeline into flash-forwards and a story about a man reconnecting across the years, From leans on reincarnation, story-walking, and a warning that echoes across decades, trading easy answers for a puzzle that keeps deepening. Fans of one show tend to recognize the DNA of the other almost immediately. For hardcore Lost fans, the connection hides an even deeper layer worth savoring. Perrineau's character on Lost was woven into that show's infamous string of numbers, the cursed sequence that haunted its survivors and drove much of its mystery, which makes his presence at the heart of another number-obsessed puzzle feel like a wink to anyone paying attention. The trivia gets stranger still. In a later series, Perrineau even played a character superstitious about a specific unlucky number, as if the actor keeps getting pulled into stories where digits carry hidden weight. And From leans into that same fascination with its dates, its notes, and its recurring figures. Casting him was practically its own Easter egg. Nothing sets the tone of From quite like its haunting main title song. The show opens each episode with a slow, unsettling cover of Que Sera Sera, performed by the Pixies, a version that drains every drop of comfort out of what was once a cheerful 1950s standard. The sweetness curdles into dread. Where the original bounced along as a reassuring tune about accepting the future, the Pixies' arrangement stretches it into something eerie and resigned. The perfect sound for a town where tomorrow is never promised and the future is exactly what everyone should fear. That single song tells you what kind of nightmare you are about to watch. The choice of that particular song carries a chilling second meaning. Que Sera Sera first became famous in a Hitchcock thriller, where a mother sang it to a child who had been kidnapped, using the melody as a desperate signal to reach her stolen son. The parallel is impossible to miss. A song once tied to a missing child now plays over a show built entirely around sacrificed children crying out to be remembered, and its title, which translates to whatever will be, lands like grim fatalism rather than reassurance. Composer Chris Tilton scored the rest of the series, and the opening credits quietly fold in Victor's childlike drawings and Ellis's paintings, hiding character clues in plain sight before a single scene begins. Music keeps doing sinister work well past the opening credits. The show drops old, gentle songs into its darkest moments, letting a warm melody play under something horrifying so the contrast turns your stomach, a trick that makes the town feel even more wrong. Sweet sounds mean trouble here. Whenever a cheerful tune drifts through a scene, longtime viewers have learned to brace themselves, because the show uses that false comfort the same way the creatures use a friendly face, luring you in before the horror arrives. The soundtrack itself has become part of the town's trap. The three-lined symbol works as one long visual Easter egg threaded through the entire series. Long before anyone explained what it meant, the shape lurked in the background of countless scenes, scratched into surfaces, hidden in the design of the town, and waiting for viewers to notice it. Attentive fans spotted it everywhere. Catching the symbol in an early episode felt like finding a secret the characters had not discovered yet, and the show rewarded that attention by slowly revealing that the mark tied together the tree, the children, and the town's oldest crime. A single recurring image quietly carried the weight of the whole mystery for seasons. Color does a lot of quiet work in From, and the show uses it like a hidden language. The two forces battling over the town are marked by shade. The man in yellow in his sickly gold suit and the pale boy in white in his innocent brightness, a visual shorthand that tells you they belong on opposite sides before either one speaks a word. Red means danger here. The bloody stones tied to the town's oldest defenses, the red lightning that tears the sky during the finale, and other flashes of crimson mark the moments when the town's deepest power stirs, giving attentive viewers a color-coded warning system running underneath the story. Watching for the palette turns out to be its own kind of clue. Numbers hide their own quiet patterns throughout the show. The figures 4, 7, and 11 surface again and again, most notably in the 7 children shown on the sacrifice stones, and in small details like an older resident mentioning her 4 kids and 7 grandkids. The show loves to play with expectation. For a long time, the numbers scratched onto the bottle tree looked like dates or some sinister code, only for the truth to reveal them as musical notes, a piece of misdirection that turned a numeric puzzle into a lullaby. Paying attention to the numbers in this town rarely gives you the answer you expect. Some of the show's best foreshadowing paid off across years rather than episodes. The warning that came through Jim's radio in the first season, telling him his wife should not be digging that hole, returned almost word for word from the man in yellow 2 seasons later, revealing that the same voice had been present all along. Miranda's paintings held another buried clue. Painted long before the man in yellow ever stepped into frame, her canvases included his figure hidden among the images, so that his eventual debut felt less like a surprise and more like a promise the show had quietly made seasons earlier. The creators planted their biggest reveals in plain sight and simply waited. Other planted clues rewarded the most patient viewers of all. From the very first episode, spiders and webs crept through the imagery, from a child's unsettling dream about a lake of tears to strange webbing the survivors found in the woods, tiny threads that fan theories would later tie to the true nature of the man in yellow. Cicadas carried their own hidden meaning. Their droning always announced the arrival of the nightmare tied to the music box, and the insects themselves, famous for burying underground and emerging transformed, quietly echoed a show obsessed with rebirth, cycles, and things that refuse to stay dead. Almost nothing in this town appears by accident. Even the show's one-word title hides a clue in plain sight. Calling it from points straight at the question that drives everything, where these people came from and the road that dragged them here, a single small word doing the work of an entire mystery. The name is a riddle by itself. That same spirit runs through the boy in white's guidance that the answers to the end live in the beginning, a line that practically dares viewers to go back and rewatch the earliest episodes hunting for details they missed. The show was quietly telling its audience how to solve it from the very first scene. All of these hidden details point to a show designed to be watched more than once. Every symbol, song, number, and buried clue was placed with intention, turning From into a puzzle that keeps giving up new secrets on each return trip through its seasons. The craft runs bone deep. None of it happened by chance, which raises a natural curiosity about the people who built this world and the real place where it all came to life, from the mind that dreamed it up to the remote spot where it was filmed. That behind-the-scenes story is where we head next. Latest theories and Season 5 predictions. With 4 seasons finished and the finale leaving the town defenseless, the fan community has poured its energy into figuring out what everything means and how the story ends. This section collects the freshest theories circulating after that 4th season cliffhanger, the ideas fans are debating right now across every corner of the internet. These are the newest pieces of the puzzle. Rather than the old, worn-out guesses, The theories here reflect where the conversation has actually landed since the finale aired, from the true nature of the two mysterious entities to the strange fate waiting for the survivors in the final season. This is the current state of the mystery, as fans see it today. The biggest theory to emerge lately reframes the two mysterious figures as warring gods. Instead of a simple villain and a helper, fans increasingly read the man in yellow and the boy in white as opposing powers of roughly equal strength, two ancient beings locked in a contest that has raged for centuries. Their game board would be the town itself. Under this reading, the trapped humans are less victims than playing pieces, pulled into a match between forces that use suffering and survival to score points against each other, which recasts every rule and every death as a move in a game far bigger than the people caught inside it. The horror stops being random and becomes a war nobody signed up to fight. The fourth season finale gave this theory its strongest fuel yet. For the first time, the man in yellow and the boy in white faced each other directly and traded words about who would win, speaking like rivals in the middle of a long game rather than a monster and its prey. Both sides adjust the rules. Fans point to the way the terms of the town seem to shift from one cycle to the next, with new powers, new arrivals, and new tragedies appearing, as if two players keep changing the board to gain an edge, and that constant rewriting fits a contest between equals far better than a single all-powerful evil. Season 5 may finally reveal what these two are really playing for. A second major theory hidden in plain sight concerns the true form of the man in yellow, a giant spider. Careful viewers noticed that spiders and webs have haunted the show since its very first episode, from a child's dream of a lake of tears to strange webbing found in the woods, clues that fans now believe point toward the entity's real shape. The suit is only a disguise. Under this theory, the man in yellow is not truly a man at all, but a monstrous spider wearing borrowed human forms, an ancient predator sitting at the center of a web that stretches across the whole town, patiently trapping everything that wanders in. The imagery has been building toward that reveal for years. That spider theory ties directly into the biggest prediction about escape, the Lake of Tears. Many fans believe the real way out of the town is not the endless looping road but a hidden lake, the same lake glimpsed in a child's early dream and hinted at ever since. The road was always a trap. In the fourth season, the ghost of Jim reached out to Ethan and urged the boy to find the lake, treating it as something real and reachable, which suggests the town's true exit has been waiting to be discovered all along, guarded by the spider that does not want anyone to leave. Finding that lake could become the survivors' whole mission in the final season. The boy in white remains one of the show's deepest unsolved mysteries, and theories about him have only multiplied. He has appeared unchanged for decades, guiding Victor in the past and Ethan in the present, always nudging the trapped toward the truth, yet no one knows what he actually is. Good intentions are not guaranteed. Some fans see him as a benevolent guide trying to help the survivors escape, others suspect he manipulates them toward his own hidden ends, and a few tie him to the sacrificed children or to the soul of Christopher, given how closely the two were once linked. Whatever he turns out to be, the pale boy sits close to the center of whatever answer the finale delivers. One of the darkest new theories reads the finale's final moment not as an ending but as a reset. When the man in yellow dumped every talisman down the faraway tree, it looked like pure destruction, but a growing number of fans think he was scattering them on purpose. The cycle was starting over. Under this reading, the talismans will end up hidden away exactly where a future Boyd, or someone like him, will stumble onto them again and rediscover the defense from scratch, restarting the whole grim process that fans have watched for 4 seasons, which would mean the story's ending loops right back to its beginning. The most chilling possibility is that the town simply resets and begins again. Another growing thread pushes the mystery beyond a single haunted town and into stranger territory. The man in yellow threw the talismans down what the show calls the faraway tree, a name that hints at other places, other worlds, connected to the town through its tunnels and trees. Reality here may run deeper than one town. Some fans have started to suspect that the town is only one piece of a much larger system, a network of trapped realms or a fracture between worlds, which would explain the reincarnations, the time travel, and the way people can sometimes slip out to distant places like Maine. If the final season opens that door, From could turn out to be far bigger on the inside than anyone guessed. The children's bones sit at the center of nearly every hopeful theory about the ending. After risking everything to recover them, the survivors now hold what many believe is the one key capable of breaking the cycle for good, though no one is quite sure how to use it. Even Jade admits he does not know. The leading guess is that the bones need to be laid to rest or destroyed in some final act that frees the sacrificed children and ends the town's centuries-old debt, satisfying the demand to remember that has driven the whole nightmare. Whatever the bones are truly for, the last season almost certainly turns on what the survivors decide to do with them. A haunting theory has grown around Boyd himself, the idea that he is destined to become the next Man in Yellow. Promotional material for the 4th season teased the notion of becoming the very thing you fear, and viewers have caught brief flashes of darkness in Boyd's eyes, hints that the town may be grooming its most steadfast protector into its next warden. The hero could become the horror. Fans note that the show already toyed with a similar fate for another character before ruling it out, which some read as a sign that the real candidate for that grim transformation is Boyd, the man who has sacrificed the most and carries the deepest wounds. Turning the show's moral center into its monster would be a gut punch worthy of this story. Fatima's transformation has opened its own branch of theories about what she becomes. Having turned fully into a creature while somehow keeping her human mind, she stands as something the town has never produced before, a monster with a soul still intact. That makes her a wild card. Some fans predict Fatima will use her new nature to hunt the other creatures and turn their own power against them, becoming an unlikely weapon for the survivors, while others expect a heartbreaking end where Ellis is forced to put down the woman he loves. Either way, a self-aware creature loose in the final season could tip the balance in ways no one can fully predict. Julie's unfinished story-walking arc has sparked a subtler theory tied to a single photograph. The old photo that exposed the Man in Yellow and got Elgin killed may, some sharp-eyed fans argue, contain Julie herself somewhere in the frame, which would mean she was physically present in the town's distant past. Her power was never fully explained. If Julie truly walked into an earlier era and left her image behind in an old picture, then her ability to move through time could play a decisive role in the ending, letting her reach back and change events the way she once reached back to save Boyd. The daughter who walked away in the first season may hold a key no one else can touch. Ethan has quietly become a favorite subject of Endgame theories, thanks to his bond with the boy in white. The youngest Matthews has been fed clues no adult receives, treating the town like a puzzle to be solved rather than a prison to endure, which many fans believe positions him as the one who finally cracks the mystery. Children keep unlocking this town. Given that the ghost of his father urged him specifically to find the lake, some predict Ethan will lead the survivors to the true exit, or even inherit a role in the town's strange machinery the way Victor once did. The show has always spoken loudest to its children, and the ending may belong to one of them. Beyond the big cosmic theories, fans spend just as much energy predicting who actually makes it out. Many hope this is finally the cycle where Tabitha and Jade succeed, freeing the children and breaking a curse their souls have carried for centuries, giving two ancient failures their long-overdue victory. Not everyone expects a happy ending. Predictions for Victor range from a peaceful release after a lifetime of suffering to a tragic death just short of freedom, while fans debate whether Sarah can find redemption, whether Boyd survives his darkness, and how many of the core survivors the show is willing to spare. The safest bet is that the town will demand a heavy price before it lets anyone go. All of these theories point toward a final season with an enormous amount to resolve. Season 5 has to explain what the Man in Yellow and the Boy in White truly are, what the bones can do, whether the lake is a real way out, and whether anyone escapes the town at all. Tying together threads, the show has been spinning since the very first episode. The list of questions is long. Every major character stands at the edge of a resolution, from Boyd's possible corruption to Fatima's monstrous fate to Tabitha and Jade's centuries-old mission, and the writers have promised that this last run exists to deliver answers rather than stall for more. The endgame has to pay off 5 seasons of patience in a single stretch. Fans expect the finale to land somewhere between 2 very different outcomes. On the bleak end sits the loop theory, where the town resets, a new warden rises, and the whole cycle begins again with fresh victims and the same old horror. Hope pulls the other direction. On the brighter end, the survivors finally lay the children to rest, break the ancient curse, and walk free through a door the town never wanted them to find, ending centuries of suffering at last. The truth almost certainly lands somewhere in the tension between those 2 poles, which is exactly what makes the wait for the final season so hard to bear. For now, all of it remains guesswork, the shared obsession of a fanbase waiting to see how its favorite nightmare ends. These theories are the fun of the long wait between seasons, the puzzle pieces everyone keeps rearranging in search of a picture that finally makes sense. Some questions run even deeper. Beneath the predictions about spiders, gods, and bones lie the quiet, unanswered mysteries the show has never touched, the kind of lingering questions worth drifting off to, and those are where this journey through the town finally comes to rest. Behind the scenes. Behind the nightmare sits a very real production story, one that runs from a single haunting idea to a purpose-built town in the Canadian woods. This section leaves the fiction behind to look at how From actually got made, at the creator who dreamed it up, the team who brought it to life, and the remote set where the whole thing was filmed. The real story has its own strange resonance. Understanding where the show came from, and the moment of grief that first sparked it, adds a quiet weight to everything the town puts its characters through. This is From the outside looking in. From is the creation of John Griffin, and it marked his first series as the driving force behind a show. The idea took root in the aftermath of the September 11th attacks, when Griffin found himself struck by how quickly a world that felt solid could simply fall away. Nothing we build is permanent. That realization, that the ordinary structures people invest their lives in can vanish in an instant, became the emotional core of a town where families lose everything overnight, and the rules of normal life stop applying. A story about a place that traps and unmakes people grew out of a very real reckoning with impermanence. Getting the show onto screens took a winding path of its own. First announced back in 2018, as part of a deal tied to the Russo brothers and their production company, the project drifted for a few years before landing at the network Epix in 2021, which rebranded as MGM Plus between the first and second seasons. Patience paid off in the end. What began as one entry in a larger slate of ideas grew into a genuine hit, and the years spent developing it gave Griffin and his collaborators time to build out the dense mythology that would keep audiences hooked once the show finally arrived. The long road to production mirrored the long road trapping its characters. The people behind, From read like a roster of modern genre heavyweights. The Russo brothers, best known for directing the biggest Marvel blockbusters, served as producers through their company, lending the project serious muscle from the start. Talent gathered fast around the idea. Veterans of Lost and Fringe joined the team alongside a group of seasoned producers, and Harold Perrineau himself took a producing role in addition to starring, giving the show a lead who was invested in far more than his own performance. That much experience pointed at one goal: telling a slow-burn mystery that actually knew where it was going. One of the most impressive facts about From is that the town is real. Rather than relying on digital sets, the production built an entire village in Nova Scotia, raising a church, a diner, a grand mansion, and a sheriff's station along an existing stretch of road in the woods near a community called Beaver Bank. The forest is real too. Nearby provincial parkland provided the endless, menacing tree line that surrounds the town, and the whole operation ran out of nearby Halifax, turning a quiet corner of the Canadian countryside into one of television's eeriest locations. The place you see on screen is a physical town you could actually walk through. The crew took real pride in how convincing the set turned out. Those who worked on it marveled at how fast the town went up and how completely believable it looked, so that anyone driving through would swear it was an ordinary rural community rather than an elaborate film set. The location carried an eerie coincidence of its own. Beaver Bank itself had once been home to a small community that disappeared decades ago, a vanished settlement that gives the real-world backdrop an unsettling echo of the fictional town built on top of it. A show about a place that swallows people rose on ground where a real place had already faded away. The show's monsters owe much of their terror to old-fashioned craft rather than heavy digital effects. Its creatures are played by real performers whose stillness and unnerving smiles do most of the work, relying on human faces twisted just slightly wrong to unsettle viewers in a way pure animation rarely manages. Restraint is the secret. By keeping the horror grounded in something that looks almost human, the show taps a deeper fear than any elaborate beast could, the dread of a familiar face that means you harm. And that choice has become one of From's signature strengths. The smiling things work because they are so nearly people. For all its mystery, From is not being made up as it goes along. Griffin has described the show's mythology as a roadmap, a planned structure the writers follow while staying open to the surprises that come naturally in the telling. The ending was always in view. That balance between a fixed destination and room to improvise is exactly why the show can drop clues years ahead of their payoff, because the people writing it know where the story is headed even when the audience does not. A mystery this tightly wound only works when its creators are steering toward a real answer. That confidence has paid off in a big way. From became the most-watched series in its network's history, earning glowing reviews that included a rare perfect critical score for its third season. And its popularity gave the creators the freedom to end the story on their own terms. 5 seasons had always been the plan. Griffin briefly weighed, stretching it to a 6th, but decided more episodes would serve the team's reluctance to say goodbye rather than the story itself, and so the 5th season, confirmed as the last, will bring the whole nightmare to a close. After nearly 5 seasons of questions, the finish line is finally in sight. As the show heads into its finale, its creators have grown more open about where it is going. Griffin has described the 4th season as the start of a new phase, saying the characters have crossed a point of no return, and that the final season is built around one idea, the endgame. The gloves are off now. After years of carefully guarding the mystery, the people behind From are signaling that the answers are finally coming, that the last season exists to resolve everything the show has been building toward, rather than to stall for more time. All of which raises the biggest question of all: what happens next? And the theories trying to answer it are where we go from here. Open questions to drift off on. After everything the town has revealed, a handful of quiet questions still linger in the dark, waiting for the final season to answer them. These are the mysteries to carry with you as the night settles in. The soft, unresolved threads that make From the kind of story you can turn over slowly in your mind. None of them have answers yet. The show has spent 4 seasons opening doors it has not yet walked through, leaving a gentle trail of wonder for anyone patient enough to sit with it, and there is a certain peace in holding questions that do not need to be solved tonight. Let these last thoughts drift by as slowly as they like. The deepest question of all is simply what the 2 ancient figures really are. No one truly knows the nature of the man in yellow or the pale boy in white, whether they are gods, spirits, or something the world has no name for, and the show has been careful to keep their secrets folded away. Their true faces stay hidden. For all the theories about wardens and warring powers, the honest answer is that these 2 remain a mystery even now, watching over the town from somewhere just beyond understanding, and their real purpose is one of the quiet unknowns the final season will have to gently unfold. Whatever they are, they have been there from the very beginning. Another question drifts underneath everything: the matter of whether anyone can ever truly leave. Tabitha once woke far away in Maine, and the survivors now whisper about a hidden lake that might be a real way out. Yet no one has ever walked free and stayed free. The road always leads back. Whether the town has any true exit at all, or whether every escape is just another turn of the same endless loop, remains one of the most haunting uncertainties the story holds. A soft ache running under every hopeful plan the survivors make. The way out, if there is one, has stayed hidden for centuries. The sacrificed children raise a question that sits at the tender heart of the whole show. After centuries buried beneath the town, waiting only to be remembered. No one yet knows whether they can finally be freed or laid to rest. Rest has never come for them. The survivors carry their small bones now like a fragile promise, uncertain what will break the ancient debt or what remembering those lost children will finally cost. And that gentle uncertainty gives the story its aching, sorrowful center. Somewhere under the roots of that old tree, the children are still waiting to be let go. Woven through all of it is the oldest question the town keeps asking: whether the cycle can ever truly be broken. Tabitha and Jade have failed to save the children across more lifetimes than they can count, and no one knows if this turn of the wheel will finally be the one that sets things right. Some patterns feel unbreakable. Whether two weary souls can at last undo a centuries-old wrong, or whether the town will simply pull them back to try again, is the quiet heartbeat beneath every hope the survivors hold. And it is the question the final season carries most tenderly of all. Maybe this time is different, and maybe it is only one more turn of the wheel. One of the gentlest questions belongs to Victor, the boy who has waited the longest of anyone. After more than 40 years trapped in the town that took his mother and his sister, no one knows whether he will ever find his way home, or whether peace will only reach him at the very end. Some griefs run very deep. The quiet hope that the child who buried so many of the dead might finally be released, and simply allowed to rest, is one of the tenderest threads left dangling. A small wish for one gentle soul who has endured more than anyone should. Victor has been waiting so long that even freedom might feel strange to him now. Beyond the plot itself lie the softer, stranger questions the show may never fully answer. Why this particular place exists, what truly waits past the endless tree line, and whether there is any meaning behind the hunger of the town, or only the hunger itself, are the kinds of wonderings that have no tidy resolution. Some mysteries are meant to breathe. Part of what makes From linger in the mind is that it leaves room for these open spaces, the quiet corners where the imagination can wander long after the screen goes dark, and there is comfort in a story generous enough to let some questions simply remain. Not everything needs an answer to be worth thinking about. Underneath every human question lies the strange, patient endurance of the town itself. Older than anyone trapped inside it and indifferent to the lives it takes, the place has outlasted countless generations, and whether it will ever truly stop, or simply go on swallowing travelers long after these survivors are gone, is a thought too vast to fully hold. The town was here before them. Something about that quiet permanence, a small forgotten place that keeps turning through its cycles while the world outside forgets it exists, gives the whole story a haunting, dreamlike stillness. In the end, the town may be the only thing that truly remembers. For now, the town keeps its secrets a little while longer, holding its answers just out of reach until the final season arrives to tell the rest. There is a strange calm in that waiting, in knowing the story is not finished and the mystery is still alive, still turning slowly in the dark like the town itself. The questions can rest until then. Let them settle softly as you drift. The sacrificed children, the two silent figures, the endless road, and the fragile hope that somewhere, somehow, the people of that town will finally find their way home. The rest of the story will still be there when you wake. Thank you for spending this quiet time in the town with me. If these slow, calm journeys through the dark help you drift off, there are many more waiting on the channel whenever you need them. For now, let the mystery rest, close your eyes, and sleep well, and I will see you in the next one.